Hi class. Hope you're all safe and your friends and families are safe. Today we are going to move on to chapter 9, which is joints. And how do we define a joint? Now, the fancy term for joint is articulation. And articulation is defined as a place where a bone meets another bone, a bone meets a cartilage, or a bone meets a tooth. So remember that articulation or joint is not only the connection between a bone and a bone, but it also refers to articulation between bone and a cartilage and bone and a tooth. Now, joints or articulations vary in stability and mobility, and there exists an inverse relationship between joint stability and mobility, and which we are going to see here. So if you look at this diagram, let's follow this. On the left hand side, we see the glenohumeral joint or the shoulder joint. And we all know that the shoulder joint is very, very mobile. We can do a lot of things with our shoulder joint. So it's a highly mobile joint, very mobile, right? So shoulder joint is very mobile. However, how common is shoulder joint dislocation? Very, very common. So it's a very, very unstable joint. Do you see that? So this is a very unstable joint. On the opposite side, on the right hand side, if you look at the suture, which is the joint between the skull bones, a suture is very immobile. It doesn't move. We know that. However, it's a very stable joint. So we understand that there is an inverse relationship between joint mobility and joint stability. Okay. Now, I will just draw things on my computer, very similar to what I usually do for a class lecture. So we are talking about joints. Okay. Joints can be classified based on anatomy and based on function. Based on function. So based on anatomy, so classification based on anatomy. Based on anatomy, joints can be classified into 3 types. First, we have something called fibrous joint. Then we have something called cartilaginous joint. And finally, we have something called synovial joint. You might have heard about synovial joint before. Okay, so let's take one at a time. A fibrous joint is a joint where the cementing material is dense regular connective tissue. So the cementing material here is dense regular connective tissue. If you look at a cartilaginous joint, the cementing material is a piece of cartilage. And it can be either hyaline cartilage or fibrocartilage. We will see. So it's a cartilage and it can be hyaline or fibrocartilage. And a synovial joint has a fluid-filled cavity. This has a fluid-filled cavity. Okay, so that's a synovial joint. Now we will look at the different types of fibrous joints. We will talk about the examples, and we will do the same for cartilaginous joints and synovial joints. If you look at your study guide, there is a chart which you need to fill out based on the information that I provide in this recorded lecture. Okay, so follow my lecture and try to fill out the study guide. It's a big, big chart. Okay, Now, looking at types of fibrous joints, there are three types of fibrous joints. The first one is called suture. Suture. We know what a suture is. A suture is, excuse me, my dog is barking. Hold on, let me open up the door for him. Oreo, can you stop? Okay, sorry guys. So suture is the joint that we see in between the skull bones, and that's the first type of fibrous joint. The second one, so we see suture between skull bones. The second type is called gomphosis. Gomphosis. And this is the articulation between tooth and socket. That's gomphosis. And the third one is called syndesmosis. And syndesmosis is the joint between parallel bones of your body, like radius and ulna. Those are parallel bones. Tibia and fibula, those two are parallel bones. So if I draw quickly radius and ulna, in between radius and ulna, this joint right here is syndesmosis. This is syndesmosis. Do you see? It's like a membrane between, it's a dense regular connective tissue membrane between long bones of the body. Now, so we talked about three types of fibrous joints: suture, gomphosis, syndesmosis. Know that for each one of these, the cementing material is dense, regular connective tissue. Okay, moving on to cartilaginous joints. They are of two types. The first one is called Syncrondrosis. Syncrondrosis, D-R-O-S-E-S. In case of syncrondrosis, there is a hyaline cartilage between the articulating bones. And classic example is articular cartilage. So do you remember that the end of long bones, this is a long bone. Okay, this is a long bone. The end of long bone has this hyaline cartilage right here. And this helps in articulation. Sorry, my bad. Just ignore this. Hold on, let me erase this. Okay, sorry. So syncrondrosis is a piece of hyaline cartilage between two bones. And do you remember growth plate? So growth plate is a classic example. This is a long bone, and this is the growth plate or the epiphyseal plate. So this is the growth plate. So growth plate is a piece of hyaline cartilage that is sandwiched between diaphysis and epiphysis of a long bone, and that is a classic example of syncrondrosis. Another example of syncrondrosis, so this is one example. Another example of syncrondrosis is the costochondral cartilage or the costal cartilage. Costal cartilage. Do you remember what costal cartilage is? Costal cartilage are the cartilages that connect the ribs to the sternum. So let's say this is your sternum, and I'm just drawing one side. These are the ribs, right? So hold on. let me use a different color. Okay, so these are the costal cartilages in blue. I'm just describing one, okay? So these are the costal cartilages. Now, this joint right here, do you see this joint between the rib and the costal cartilage? This is a synchondrosis. So growth plate is synchondrosis, and the joint between the ribs and costal cartilage is synchondrosis. Good. So all these are synchondrosis. Are we good, class? Moving on to the next type of cartilaginous joint. So let's do it here. Let me change the color back to red. So we are looking at cartilaginous joint, and we already talked about synchondrosis. The second one that we will talk about is symphysis. We have talked about symphysis before, and symphysis is where we have a piece of fibrocartilage between connecting bones. Classic example is your pubic symphysis. That's one example. Another example is intervertebral discs between the bones of the vertebrae. Okay, so to review, we know that in case of cartilaginous joint, there is a piece of cartilage between articulating bones. There are two types of cartilaginous joints. The first one is synchondrosis, where we have a piece of hyaline cartilage between articulating bones. And the second one is symphysis, where we have a piece of fibrocartilage between articulating bones. Examples of synchondrosis involve the growth plate and the joint between the rib and the costal cartilage. And example of symphysis include our pubic symphysis, remember, which is slightly movable in females but totally immovable in males, and then the intervertebral discs, which are present in between the bones of the vertebrae. I will stop here and then make another video with the synovial joints. All right? Okay.